Good evening and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil number 46.1. We're 46 weeks straight into this series. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am joined by my co-hosts Andrew Smith and Kendra Christian. Today marks 3,451 days since the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange began. 404 days since he was trafficked out of the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold for a $4.2 billion IMF loan to Ecuador. 111 days until the second round of extradition hearings begin in London and our protests begin in DC. 1,081 days of incarceration for reality winner. And on the plus side, 67 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning following the decade-long WikiLeaks grand jury dismissal. We are joined tonight by the Convo couches, Fiorella Isabel, by the Ron Paul Institute's Norman Singleton, and I believe eventually John Kiriakou will be on as well. Guys, we are organizing for DC as we speak, and as such, we are trying to get our sorry behinds there. We do have a GoFundMe up. We're going to post the link a few times throughout the vigil tonight. Feel free to share the link if you can't donate. If you can donate, please do that. The trial is going to last about 3 weeks. We are trying to make sure that at least some of us are there for all 3 of those weeks. So please, if you can donate, if you can't, share the link. Let's go ahead and start off the round of interviews, though. How's it going, Fee? How you doing? It's good to see you.
It's going well. It's going well. You know, quarantining, doing as many shows as possible. Still trying to get as much information out there as possible, taking care of this advantage of this time to actually be putting out as much content and be diving deep into what's left of the electoral process in this country, which is a sad state of affairs right now. Given that state of affairs,
what is left?
Well, that's exactly it. You know, there's a lot of confused people left, people that need guidance. But I think it's actually an opportunity to take things outside of electoral politics and actually go in that direction and stop relying on politicians to be the sole people that change anything, right? Like there's a lot of movements that we could be a part of.
I couldn't agree with that more. I've been screaming at people since the mid-90s when I could vote for the first time that putting your faith in politicians is the last possible thing you would want to do, and that voting is the laziest and least effective political action anyone can make. Having said that, I guess there's probably still down, but like they haven't canceled elections entirely yet. They're going to try, according to Greg Palast, up to 20% of the vote can be tampered with by mail-in ballot, which I guess is a little bit better than going and voting on an electronic machine. Yeah. But I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't know. We are actually, John Kiriakou is in the house now too. John, how you doing?
Hey folks, how are you, Steve?
Doing well. It's good to see you again, sir.
My pleasure.
And I'm gonna pitch this one to Norm first, and then you guys can hop in. At what point do people stop paying attention to electoral politics as the sole vehicle through which change can happen? And that one's for you, Norm. But if he doesn't unmute, then somebody else can field it.
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that. I'm putting my dog away.
Okay.
Actually, funny because dogs. Sometimes politicians, you have to treat them like you would treat a dog or a toddler, which is discipline and constant watching them and not letting them get away with anything. And I think that the question about electoral politics, I see the point that people say it's a dead end. I would say that the problem is not so much that it's a dead end or that people put too much faith in politicians. I would actually say that you shouldn't put any faith in politicians. As a Christian, I actually have a Messiah, a Savior named Jesus Christ, and I really prefer him to Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But the thing that people fail to do in political movements enough of is holding politicians accountable and forgetting that the real work begins the day after election, because you really need to be pressuring constantly the politicians to make sure they keep their promises, to make sure they don't betray you, to make sure they don't sell you out to the special interest and the party leadership. And not to step on anybody's toes here, but from what I've been seeing and reading and hearing lately from a few progressive sources, particularly Jimmy Dore, is that correct pronunciation? Is that and some others, is that the left is actually doing a fairly bad job of that, much worse than the right did. I think the Freedom Caucus did a much better job of trying to hold Boehner and Ryan accountable and standing up to them than the Progressive Caucus is doing with Nancy Pelosi.
I personally don't think the Progressive Caucus is incentivized to hold to any sort of progressive ideals. There's no accountability because they're either going to get primaried from within the Democratic Party or they're going to get primaried by somebody else who's going to go to Washington and run up against the wall that is Nancy Pelosi passing 82 to 88% of Donald Trump's agenda. That's Chuck Schumer voting to fast track what now a total of 198 judges, but fast tracking 37 of them. They're running into a machine that incentivizes them to participate and to ignore the electorate. And Fee's got the pulse on this because that's what her show covers. 99, you know.
Well, that's what the organization that I run, and I just want to correct briefly that my introduction is I'm with Campaign for Liberty, which is Dr. Ron Paul's 501c4 grassroots activism and education group. We are separate from the Ron Paul Institute, which is a 501c3 educational foundation that focuses on foreign policy and civil liberties, although I'm a big fan and good friend of Daniel McAdams and a fan of everything that the Institute does. But I think that what we do at Campaign for Liberty is we try to mobilize people to call, email, and write their representatives on legislation. I know people can be cynical and say, well, what good does one phone call do? Well, one phone call doesn't do any good. But multiply one by 100 phone calls, and then you are actually going to make an impact. There is strength in numbers, there is strength in accountability, and there is strength in backbone. And there's a lot of guys. So when I worked for Dr. Paul for 15 years on Capitol Hill from 1997 to 2012, 11 of those as his legislative director, which is the top policy job at a congressional office. And I can tell you from that, we did see a change in how politicians were willing, members of Congress were willing to stand up and stand with Dr. Paul on issues like audit the Fed and even opposing the Patriot Act and foreign interventionism. And that wasn't because all of a sudden they had a come to Jesus moment and realized that Ron was right. It was because they saw that there was a constituency out there for these ideas that was mobilized, enthusiastic, and was actually coming to their town hall meetings, calling their offices, writing their offices, emailing their offices, and demanding that they stand with Ron.
You know, we just had a vote on provisions of the Patriot Act being reauthorized, I believe, permanently. How'd that go, Pete?
Well, it went really bad. I mean, there's several things. There's the HR 6666 that allows that it's just more violation of privacy rights against people. Then there's the resolution that was just voted down. It was an amendment to protect the FBI from going after your browser history. And 10 senators didn't show up for that vote. It was only in the Senate. The House hasn't voted on it yet. And one of those senators was Senator Bernie Sanders. He hasn't necessarily been the staunchest advocate of civil liberties. I feel like that is one of his weak points from my perspective. But it was important that he was there, and he didn't show up, and that sparked a lot of criticism, because if he is to be the leader, even still right now, of the progressive movement, he should be protecting our civil liberties. And I think that's a very general assertion. What is civil liberties? I mean, a lot of people on the left, and I consider myself to be part of the left, do not even care or realize how important their civil liberties are. They see that as a libertarian construct, and they look at it with disdain. And I think that is because some of the, the Republican, more conservative side of the libertarian movement has kind of been against social safety nets. But I think there is a coalition there that could be built upon by certain candidates. I think Jesse Ventura would be a great candidate that kind of gets from both ends. He gets from the left. He also gets from the more independent-minded libertarian. Tulsi Gabbard was able to do the same while she was campaigning for the presidency. But I think what we're seeing here is fascism of the left and the fascism of the right are entirely tools of the establishment. The left, the liberal left, I would say, loves to call out the right as being fascist, loves to say Donald Trump is a fascist. What they fail to realize is both Democrats and Republicans are consistently getting rid of habeas corpus. They're completely diminishing the power that we have, the individual freedoms that we have as people. And they use the facade of national security and safety to do that. We're seeing that happen right now because there's a pandemic, and they can easily use that excuse to infringe upon our civil liberties. And that's a very dangerous thing that's happening. And I think it's something that more people on the left, on the socialist left, need to sort of pay attention to, because I'm not really seeing it. I'm seeing it more on the independent libertarian side. And I think there's something to be said about that, and something to explore for whoever next that we support as either president, Congress, whatever. They should be talking about your civil liberties. They should be talking about the election integrity. They should be talking about the issues that nobody's talking about right now. The fact that our system is set up to make your vote not count. It is jumping through hoops to simply cast a vote. Americans are very lazy when it comes to participation in our political system, also because of the fact that this is how the system makes it. It makes you, it's better for the establishment that you don't pay attention, that you're overworked. So, yeah.
So, John, as someone that's personally experienced the power of the national security state, and someone that's involved in traditional media structure, what do you think are some good ways that we could try to coalesce people into like a post-partisan dialogue about civil liberties like free speech, about privacy, and things like that?
Good question. Tough question. I was thinking a minute ago that we've got to push some of these leaders on the left and the right, people like Bernie Sanders, because Ron Wyden's not going to be around forever, and we can't put all of our eggs in the baskets of Ron Wyden and Mike Lee and Rand Paul. It's just not going to get us anywhere. So with that said, I feel like the alternative media is gaining a foothold that I've never seen before. I, for one, get my news from the likes of Consortium News and reader-supported news and outlets like that. I scan outlets on the left and the right, and I've gotten to the point where I rarely go to the mainstream media. I think I'm not alone in that. I think that that's a trend, and I think that that's where we need to go. With that said, what we lack, most importantly, is money. Let me tell you a short story. In 2016, I traveled to 12 states with Gary Johnson, who was the Libertarian nominee for president that year. And one of the things he told me, and he mentioned it very offhandedly, that really stuck with me, was that the Libertarian Party does not have a benefactor. There was a family in California that made its money in canned tomatoes, he said, that had been very generous. But in terms of an actual ongoing benefactor, there just wasn't one. The Democrats and the Republicans have hundreds of such benefactors. Well, it's the same thing with the alternative media. We need a benefactor, whether that media is on the left or the right, because it's one thing to write for these outlets. It's another thing for the news to actually get out there, for people to actually see it. I feel like I write my fingers to the bone, right? I write op-eds at least every week. I try to pump out books as frequently as I can. And that's not unusual. There are a lot of people that do that. But if nobody has access to the sites, nobody's going to get the news. Nobody's going to be informed the way we think people ought to be informed. And I think that one of the things we need to do is to find ourselves one or two or 50 of these benefactors. Certainly, we're not the only people in America thinking this way.
I have a question kind of for all the guests. I mean, given with what we've discussed then, exactly, how important, if you could convey to people, is it that we free Julian Assange, that we work for this free press to get that out? I mean, and this is for all the guests, anybody who wants to touch on that.
I think it's very important because the precedent that is being set here is chilling in terms of its effect on free speech and on whistleblowers and people who want to publish what the whistleblowers tell them. And what it's going to lead to is a society where you can only be a whistleblower if you have the approval of Adam Schiff or on the other side, Devin Nunes, who I don't know how many of you followed his voting record before he became the great defender of civil liberties when a president of his own party was the target of the deep state. But he never really expressed that much concern with overreach and massive government surveillance when it was just anti-war activists and even anti-tax and Tea Party activists that were being targeted by the deep state.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's important that we set a precedent for alternative media, because mainstream media is a propaganda machine now for the military industrial complex and for the intelligence community. They control what the majority of the population in our country sees, hears, and believes. And no matter how hard we try, we are at a disadvantage in money and networking and reach as independent media. And so when there is such misinformation and propaganda and miseducation of people, you're going to get a population that doesn't see that they're walking right into slaughter. And that's where we're at. And we're slowly creeping up as independent media. The only issue I have with well, let me just first say, Julian Assange, whoever is the president or whoever we start putting our support by, needs to be protecting whistleblowers. They absolutely 100% need to be, because our freedom of speech is one of the most important things that we have as a society. It's one of the things that America's always valued itself. I have a freedom of speech of saying things you might disagree with. This is why I've always been against censorship, even if it came from somebody like Alex Jones. Once they started doing that, they started going after everybody. And so we need to be very proactive in how we are going to handle that, because right now they're just going to label people as Russian assets, etc. And I think whoever else we support for any sort of politics has to have that in the front of their mind. They have to be protecting our truth tellers, and that's what has to be pushed. I don't see that being pushed on the left as much as it should be. I think, this last election kind of is showing that. But even people like Tulsi Gabbard and other progressives are not really like, when it comes to like civil liberties, they'll like, you know, they'll say, oh, we have to protect people first. And that's kind of something that I'm wary of when it comes to politicians. They're just not really on it. And I think it'll come from independent media like you guys and us, and, you know, because it is our livelihood too. It's our lives that depend on standing up for people like Julian Assange and other whistleblowers.
Josh,
you want to weigh in?
there. You go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just gonna ask John if you wanted to weigh
Yeah,
in on that.
I actually would. This is something I've been trying to talk about a lot in the last several weeks. One of the things that just flabbergasts me is our seeming inability to convince the likes of the Washington Post and the New York Times and other mainstream outlets that if Julian is convicted, they're next. You know, they think that, well, Donald Trump's not going to be around forever. He might not even be around for more than another 8 months. But we saw under the Obama administration, mainstream journalists described as unindicted co-conspirators by the Attorney General of the United States. We saw raids on the homes of working mainstream journalists. If they refuse to stand up and admit publicly that Julian Assange is a journalist and a publisher, there's literally nothing to stop the government from targeting them next. It's as simple as that.
And that's, to that point, that's what the special administrative measures within the United States really reveal, is the true power that the federal government holds, that it can push down against any individual that it chooses. Because it's something that they basically said, yes, Julian will be placed under special administrative measures when he gets here, which basically completely limits access to his attorney, access to information, and a bunch of other just heinous things across the board, including 23 hours a day, if not more, of solitary confinement. Could you talk a little bit, Norm, or do you kind of have a perspective on ways in general that we can push back against projects, or not projects, but policies like SAMs and other criminal injustices that happen inside of our justice system?
There are so many different organizations doing great work out there. I work very closely, for example, with the Human Rights Defense Center, which also publishes prison legal news and criminal legal news magazines. So there are a lot of us out there working kind of independently of one another. If we can figure out a way to work together and to harness the power that we have, I think we'll be far more impactful. Right now, we're generally ignored by the mainstream media. But I mean everything from these events, like the one we're doing right now, which I find to be very beneficial. And I'm always surprised at how many people watch these and go to them later on YouTube. It's very heartening. But we need to find a way to work together in a more integrated fashion so that we can get the word out, and that we don't look like, you know, just some guy or some woman standing off to the side outside of Julian's trial yelling about civil liberties. We have important things to say, and you know, people who have legitimate experiences that the media really need to focus on. They're on point with Julian, and I think we've got a story to tell.
I think that there is some room for optimism. The fact that there is an alternative media today, the fact that there are organizations like Campaign for Liberty, like the Ron Paul Institute on the libertarian side. The fact that Dr. Paul has a daily program that is doing quite well, telling some of the truth about the coronavirus and how crazy it is that we basically shut down the entire economy for a virus that you probably have a less than 1% chance of dying unless you have a pre-existing condition. And also going back to something we talked about before, what happened last week in the Senate, we came within one vote of getting put into law that you have to get a warrant. Now, silly me, I thought that there was this thing called the Fourth Amendment that already put a warrant requirement into law before the government could take your seize your papers and records. But I guess that went out. That actually went out with the war on drugs back in the 80s and 90s, especially under George the First Attorney General William Barr. That name may ring a bell with some of you. But anyway, that was actually, when you consider where we were just 10 years ago on this bill, that kind of the first indication that he wasn't going to be nearly as good on foreign policy and civil liberties as president as he was on the campaign trail, voted for the FISA bill in 2008. And it was basically widely acknowledged that this was just a political move on his part because he didn't think he could vote against it. Where today, you see people on both sides lining up to vote for a Wyden-Daines amendment. You have a very liberal senator and you have a very conservative senator or libertarianist senator coming together to stop warrantless wiretapping, and they almost won, even though McConnell set a 60-vote threshold. This is progress. And some other things we're making progress on: foreign policy. On the Republican Party, Donald Trump did what Ron Paul tried to do, and back in the 90s, Pat Buchanan tried to do, which is run a successful campaign in the Republican primary, challenging conventional neoconservative wisdom and running as the avowed enemy of Bill Kristol. And Dr. Paul did better than anyone could have expected. His son has done better than anyone could have expected in his career. But then also look at Donald Trump in 2016. He stood up before a Republican primary debate and said that going into Iraq was a horrible mistake, and he actually called out George Bush in front of his brother. And he not only survived, he went on to get the nomination. So there is a groundswell of support, of questioning of foreign policy, of civil liberties, and of the Federal Reserve, which ought to be something that libertarians and progressives can join together on, because the Federal Reserve is, as Daniel McAdams once brilliantly called it, the dark heart of the welfare warfare state. We can argue about the welfare state, but let's work together on getting rid of the warfare state, and let's at least get rid of the corporate welfare state. I think it's about time that one thing that kind of annoys me about Republicans is when the Farm Bill comes up every 4 or 5 years, Republicans get up and stand up and scream about we need to get single mothers off the dole, so we need to put work requirements into the food stamp program or the EBT program, and then they'll shovel billions of subsidies to millionaire farmers, most of whom have never even walked on a real farm. And there's something that I think there should be room for convergence on, the left-right convergence on, libertarian and progressive convergence on, is let's at least get rid of the welfare for the rich, and then we can talk about what provisions the society could make for the poor. And if I could just be engaged, I apologize for rambling, but I have a lot of these topics excite me, as you might be able to tell. Somebody said the libertarians are against a social safety net. That's actually not true. Libertarians are against at least a federal government provided social safety net for a variety of reasons, one of which is that the federal government, as we are seeing now, can't even send out checks to people without A, screwing it up, and B, making sure that the big guys, the cronies, the fat cats are taken care of, and the average person gets some crumbs, and is supposed to be grateful for that.
No, that's a good point, and I've said forever that I support the idea of a universal healthcare system. I just don't want Congress running it. Andrew makes the point that, like, if the National Nurses Union was in charge of universal healthcare, that would put us in a much better position than, say, Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell.
And even in this situation right now, Palantir is in charge of our healthcare.
Yeah, and we've got Palantir in charge, running the healthcare of the, partnered up with the NHS in the UK as well. And when Peter Thiel is running the show, the only person that wins, or the only entity that wins, is an ever-increasing surveillance state. When I pause dramatically like that, that's someone's cue to hop in. John, you've been on before.
That's right.
So one of the big things. Oh no, go ahead, V. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like I think people don't care who runs it, as long as it happens. Other countries have a not necessarily Medicare for all, but a nationalized type of healthcare system, and they are able to manage it accordingly. I don't think it's a matter of Congress being unable to. It's a matter of Congress not wanting to because the money and the lobbyists are there. I don't necessarily trust the government to run it, but I think if we were to appoint the right people to run a healthcare system where there was no middleman, where you could just have basic healthcare for everybody, and then you could buy supplemental whatever. I like if you wanted something else, you still have the choice to do that if you'd like. But I think it's important that the argument that the government is going to infringe, they're doing it right now when we have a private health insurance industry. They're doing it right now. It doesn't matter. I don't think it's going to hurt us to go towards a universal healthcare system. We just have to find what works for our country, because our states, we're obviously a different country than, like, say, Denmark, and it's going to take a sort of different process for it.
Well, one thing to keep in mind about the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, as it's become widely known, is that so my friend Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner, who does great work on the corporates, how big business benefits from the welfare and regulatory state, has pointed out that while Obama was out in the Rose Garden demonizing the insurance industry for fighting against his health care plan, insurance industry lobbyists were sitting back in the West Wing with Obama staffers writing the bill. And when people say, oh, big insurance was against Obamacare, I say right, because big businesses would naturally hate a law that says that it is a crime for you to fail to purchase my product.
So this is something, a parallel to that we're seeing in Julian's case. When they were in court early on here, after he'd been taken into Belmarsh, the judge, who was supposed to be this neutral arbiter of this globally impacting press freedom case, walks to the back of the room to meet with the Americans that are there. So it's this level of corruption, whether it exists in like a corporate state or within the larger institutions of I would say the privatized police state at this point. But John, if you could, because you have the most experience in handling these kinds of situations firsthand in like litigation against the government and being prosecuted for proliferating truth, could you talk a little bit about what Julian actually faces? I know we've gone over it before, but just to kind of lay it out again.
Sure. Julian faces a very tough experience in the Eastern District of Virginia. And frankly, much of that is just because he's headed to the Eastern District of Virginia. I've told this story before, but I think it bears repeating. In the Eastern District here in Alexandria, Virginia, is known as the Espionage Court because that's where the government likes to file most of its national security charges. I was charged here. Julian's charged here. Ed Snowden's charged here. Jeffrey Sterling was charged here. And no national security defendant has ever won a case in the Eastern District. Now, I predicted for a long time, wrongly, as it turned out, that Julian's judge would be Judge Leonie Brinkema, who usually reserves these national security cases for herself. It turned out that Brinkema had the case taken away from her by the chief judge, who just happens to have been a FISA court judge before he was named to the Eastern District. That makes me want to run screaming from the room. We also know that the government intends to invoke something called SIPA, the Classified Information Protection Act. So what they're going to do is they're going to clear the courtroom. They're going to cover the windows and the doors with plastic sheeting and duct tape, so no one can aim a laser beam at the windows and pick up the vibrations and hear what classified conversations are taking place inside the courtroom. Everyone will be dismissed except the prosecutors and Julian. The prosecutors, the defense attorneys and Julian, the clerk and the bailiff and the jury, and that's it. Nobody else will be allowed in the room. Furthermore, the judge is going to issue a list of words to the jury that will replace words that the prosecution alleges are classified. So let's say the word NSA is or the acronym NSA is classified. Maybe they'll call it zebra or swimming pool. So anytime someone needs to refer to NSA, they won't say NSA, they'll say zebra, and there's going to be a little paper that the jury has, and it'll say NSA equals zebra, so they can follow along and understand what the heck is being said in the courtroom. It's a ridiculous exercise. And frankly, I've always maintained that it serves to bias the jury against the defendant, because the implication is even these individual words are so highly classified that we can't even utter them in this closed courtroom. So he must be guilty. He must be a bad guy. He must have done all these terrible, wrong things. So we have to convict him. With that said, no, let me add one more thing from my own experience. And again, I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. When I was headed to trial, I hired O.J. Simpson's jury consultant. He is the father of my best friend's wife. And so he did it for free. The man's never lost a case. He represented George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin shooting. He represented, besides OJ, William Kennedy Smith in his rape case. The guy's never lost a case. Literally, he's never lost a case. And so he came up to Washington. He lives in Dallas. And we got him a security clearance from the Justice Department. And he went through the files, my files, 15,000 pages of discovery. And when it was all over, we sat in the, not when it was over, but when he had finished going through the files, we sat in my attorney's conference room. And he said, look, here's the bottom line. If we were in any other district in America, I would say, let's go for it. We're going to win this thing. But the Eastern District of Virginia, he said, you don't have a chance. He said, your jury is going to be made up of employees or family members of employees of the CIA, the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, intelligence community contractors. He said, you don't have a chance. It's all stacked against you. That's why they charged you here in the first place. He said, my advice to you is to take the deal. And I took the deal. Well, Julian's not likely to be offered a deal. The whole point of Julian's case is to make an example of him, because this case is far bigger than just Julian Assange. This case is about media and media freedom. And so long as the mainstream media decides that Julian is somehow their enemy and doesn't come out in their editorial pages every single day, day after day, to support him, I think that a very bad precedent's going to be said here. Now, I've said in the past that I think the one chance he has in the Eastern District is the chance of jury nullification. There has to be one right-thinking person out there, you know, out of, what's a jury, 12 people at the federal level? 9 people, 12 people, I don't know. I never made it to a jury. But there's got to be one person out there who can think independently and conclude that this is just wrong. This whole prosecution is wrong. The case is wrong. The man has already suffered, and it has to end. That's not much to hang your hat on, but I struggle every day thinking what we can do to make it better, and I'm not coming up with a lot of ideas.
I mean, that kind of inspires me to something that Adam Kokesh had talked about in one of our previous vigils, I think, where it was the way that people choose to educate other people about certain issues and how there's not any group using jury nullification as a standing point for their hill to project to the world. Do you think that starting some kind of educational campaign in the Eastern District of Virginia about jury nullification would be effective? Do you think that would?
I do indeed. And, you know, I've raised this with a number of attorney friends who said that I was crazy, that jury nullification is illegal, that you can't encourage jury nullification. I said, I'm an independent citizen. I'm not an attorney standing up in court and saying jury nullification, right? I'm allowed to have an opinion, and I think that there's a role for jury nullification. Look, you know, at one time it was legal for 6-year-olds to work in the mines. Now it's not. Sometimes laws are just bad laws. The Espionage Act is one of them. So I think that there is a role for jury nullification.
Does that look like going around Foggy Bottom strip malls, putting copies of the Nils Melzer interview under people's windshields? Like, I'm not opposed to that. I'll go do that.
There used to be a group called the Fully Informed Jury Association, FIJA. I'm not sure if they're still around or how active they are, but one of their projects was having people stand outside the courthouse and hand out flyers targeting potential jurors, informing them of their right to judge on the facts and the law. So it has been done. I think the Libertarian Party at one point was very much behind this effort as well.
I'd kind of like to get your reaction, Norm, to John's story and the knowledge that he dropped in it. Was this stuff that you were already aware of, having worked in DC and been a part of that scene? Or
well, I actually think I heard John discuss this, the problems with the Eastern District of Virginia on Sputnik radio one day. And now I just outed myself as clearly I'm a Russian agent, because obviously why else would I be listening to Sputnik? But I was not aware of the Eastern District problem until I heard John talk about it, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. But everything he said makes sense, and it certainly makes sense in terms of the jury pool that you're going to be looking for, and you're going to be drawing, because of the nature of it, from people who are government contractors, people at the Pentagon, and they're in that culture. That they believe that they are in the right, that they are protecting America, and that people like Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and John are bad people who are disloyal to the greatest country in the history of the world.
I have a question for Fiorella. I'm wondering what do you hit the most as like roadblocks for civil liberties and for, you know, like the situation of Julian Assange within the left? Like, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that you see there? Because like, just even from what we were talking about, you know, we're looking at basically, you know, a secret court, not being able to know what's going on. I mean, for the public, to me, this is also really bad for our civil liberties, not to know what's going on in the biggest, you know, free press case of our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest roadblock is the fact that progressives, especially the progressives who consider themselves ultra leftists, do not consider this a big issue. It's definitely not one of their main concerns, and it's something that it should be a main concern. But like what I see with people I know on the left, they really this is probably last on their list. And because they look at immediate concerns, they're looking at the immediacy of a healthcare system failing. They're looking at the immediacy of being unable to pay rent. They're looking at all these issues. And in a sense, it's sort of a catch-22, because those two things work against each other. You guys know Pasta. Pasta is he was a Tulsi supporter primarily because he supported civil liberties and foreign policy above everything else. My belief is that we should support both of them, but at the same time, it's like you're not, in my opinion, it's really hard to get people's attention to something like Julian Assange if they can't see the immediate concern. So like if people are too busy like working, you know, 4 jobs and they can't pay their bills, they're really not going to care about people being bombed abroad in different countries just as much as they're really not going to care about what happens to one guy. They're not looking at the bigger picture as to, wow, this has so much of a precedent and so much effect. It's going to affect us for years and years and years because we're not paying attention to the biggest case regarding freedom of speech in our lifetime. And it's really hard. I think there has to be like work in tandem. We have to address like the concerns a lot of the working people have while being like, look, people aren't going to hear your concerns. The government is free to do whatever they want and abuse you because we don't have real like journalism in America. We have the fourth estate was supposed to be like for the people. It was supposed to be the fourth branch of government, and right now it's just a propaganda machine for the military and the intelligence community. And so if we can make people realize that they're not going to get all of these domestic issues and these concerns if they don't also pay attention to foreign policy and the civil liberties that are being constantly infringed upon us on the daily, then we could probably make that connection. You know what I mean? We have to make that connection because they're not listening to you when you're talking about Julian Assange because they're looking at it as like, okay, well, that's him. That's a separate case. No, it's all connected. And we have to look and kind of highlight exactly why everything is connected.
Something I've found to be effective, at least on a person-to-person basis, and then through my show, that I really don't hear a lot in media in general, is that your cause is fucking dead without the ability to access free and open information. Your whatever it is you're into, whatever's on the front of your sign, if it doesn't have Free Julian Assange on the back of it, you're doing your organizing wrong. Because if we don't have the ability to get this information out there, regardless of what it is, it's dead. It goes nowhere. You're talking to the 3 people that you know about it that already know about it.
Well, look, I would say look at the Ron Paul campaigns of 08 and 2012, particularly in 08. When it started, it was a very, very took advantage of Meetup, of Facebook and MySpace, if anybody remembers MySpace, and YouTube and all of those platforms that were at the time much more open to dissident ideas, and organized, shared videos, shared articles by Dr. Paul, and got the word out there as an idea of what grassroots can accomplish. Unfortunately, today you have these big tech companies in bed with the national security state, and we see the deplatforming going on, the censorship, the constant problems with YouTube demonetizing certain voices. But we still have this ability. We can still find alternatives. We can still get the word out to people. And again, you can always go back to your representative who is under our constitutional system. There's a reason why there are more representatives than there are presidents and senators. And there's a reason why they're up for election every 2 years as opposed to every 6 or every 4. That's because they're supposed to be closest to us, and the senators are supposed to be second in terms of being responsive to the people. And I think that it's a problem with political activists across the board that they kind of focus on what the executive is doing, and they ignore the fact that in our constitutional system, the president is not supposed to be the king. The president is supposed to be actually accountable to the executive branch. When they wrote the Constitution, they knew what they knew. They numbered the branches: 1 legislative, 2 executive, 3 judiciary, for a reason. And I think we've forgotten that. And I think that is one reason why we are losing our liberties to a mammoth executive state. And the only argument seems to be right now is which grumpy old man is fit to have this incredible power, Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
And I think too, in the activist communities, there's a lot of talk about censorship, where you have the left pointing out the censorship on the left, and you have the right pointing out the censorship on the right. But it's hard to find people on either side that are willing to say both are censored, and there are some that do. And you guys over at Convo Couch do a great job of this, of pointing out just the bullshit and the hypocrisy that exists between the two dynamics. But one of the things, going back to the idea of building like a post-ideological conversation, like building people up around issues that are fundamental. I think censorship and the fight for a free and open internet is one of those really big things. Could you talk about that a little bit, Fee? About like experiences you guys have had with internet censorship that, you know, maybe from a big platform, or maybe one of those like coincidences that something happened when it did?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're being censored left and right. All of our videos that deal with anything regarding intelligence agencies, anything regarding military industrial complex, any mention of Syria, any mention of any sort of foreign policy issue, Venezuela, all of that gets entirely censored. It's also not as popular. Like whenever we were talking about election integrity, it is a kind of a wonky subject. So a lot of people, like, it's hard to like get them to tune in. But that's some of the things that we've experienced are like our likes being scrubbed off, people being unsubscribed, our technology just seeming not to work at certain times. And I know that this happens because YouTube is owned by Google. So like, I know that they have their preferences. We also noticed, my friend Nico noticed how like they were like, if you were going to find one of his videos, if he searched it using this one program he did, it said it should be one of the top videos. But in reality on YouTube, it doesn't appear. You have to search every single word for our videos to appear. So the suppression is real, and it's actually known that this is a thing that they can legally do. So that's why we're trying to look at alternative like video sites like Rockfin that are more people like, you know, people friendly. They're more like a co-op type of model where you still can make money off of it, but you're not putting your viewers through so much stress, and they're not subjected to ads, and it's a little bit different. And I think we need to find alternatives in media and to kind of take away from YouTube. And I think YouTube's time is definitely ending, but I definitely see a lot of the, you know, the censorship. Also, like in LA, we only have two providers. We have either Spectrum, which bought Time Warner, or we have DirecTV, which is another corporation. And I think the majority of people use Spectrum, and in some parts they have AT&T, which is also another thing that we use as well. And that's it. You don't have access to internet from a different location. And if your area is not Beverly Hills, for instance, has fiber optic internet. They have the fastest internet. And the city of Beverly Hills can have that because they're rich and they put all their resources there. Whereas where I live in Pasadena, it's not the poorest, but it's also not the richest. And so, you know, we were Ron Placone, myself, Pasta. We all went to a city council meeting to push for just municipal internet. And basically, the AT&T lobbyist was there telling the city council that this just wouldn't work, and they made up a reason as to why it wouldn't work, but obviously it was money involved. And we have to find creative ways, and there's new technology coming up of creating our own networks, creating our own ability to promote independent media. I don't like the idea of, somebody mentioned like just one provider. I don't like that idea because I'm against centralized government. I think a centralized structure in anything could be co-opted into a powerful person having too much power. Whether like TYT is an example of that. They started out progressive, quote unquote, and then they slowly, you know, started getting these people on their board that were venture capitalists and had other interests, and you saw the reporting change. A way to avoid that is to have a decentralized structure. In whatever sort of co-op thing media can form. And I think obviously it's going to require people putting in money to it, but it should be in a way that is very transparent, that doesn't mimic the way the establishment is.
So I want to thank our guests for joining us. We do have to move to our news segment. But if you could, I'll start with Norm. Could you let people know where to find you, your work, and the organization you're involved with?
Campaign for Liberty, campaignforliberty.com. It is a 501c4 grassroots lobbying organization. Our major issues are audit the Fed, repeal the Patriot Act, free market healthcare that lets doctors and patients, not government bureaucrats or insurance agencies, control your healthcare, and basically just the entire Bill of Rights from the first all the way up through the 10th. We were founded by Dr. Ron Paul, and we strive to uphold his ideals and values. And I really appreciate being on here and everybody's time. And I hope everyone stays involved and active in whatever way you feel you can best contribute to the important cause of protecting our liberties.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And if you could, let us know your final thoughts, Fee, and where people can find you and the wonderful work you do.
Yeah, thank you guys for doing this. A lot of people aren't really covering Julian Assange as much, and I always get all my news from all of you guys. So thank you for doing this and sticking with it. I will help out and promote you guys wherever I can. My name is Fiorella Isabel. I have a Twitter, Fiorella_IM. The channel we have is the Convo Couch, spelled just like Convo, conversation, and couch. And you can find us on YouTube, on Rockfin. We also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Tell Pasta we said hey.
I will.
So do you wanna run news in order that it is on the doc there?
Yeah, I think it's pretty well set up.
Okay, Josh, if you could grab that Guardian article, we can go into it.
Mike Pompeo.
Okay, and y'all, I mean, by now, hopefully you know that if there's an opportunity to kick around Mike Pompeo, I'm going to jump up and take it. This is a case where Mike Pompeo is doing the kicking, although we'll get into why it may backfire. The Trump administration has fired the State Department's Inspector General, who is reported to have been investigating Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for potential abuse of office. The Inspector General, Steve Linick, was given notice of his dismissal late on Friday night and is to be replaced by Stephen Ackard, a close ally of the Vice President Mike Pence from his home state of Indiana. This is a funny little sidebar here. Not funny because it's Mike Pence and the guy is really like as funny as a bus full of dead babies, but funny in that I grew up in the district what Mike Pence wound up representing. Now, this is not my fault because I was already gone, but Mike Pence used to be a radio guy, and his tagline for his radio show was that he was like Rush Limbaugh on decaf. And that was enough for the people of the 6th Congressional District of Indiana to be like, yeah, that's our guy. We'll take that guy. Back to the article. State Department spokesman said that Ackard, who had been running the Office for Foreign Missions, would take over immediately as acting IG. According to a Democratic congressional aide, just before his abrupt dismissal, Linick had opened an investigation into allegations that Pompeo had been using a political appointee at state to run personal errands for him and his wife, Susan. Let's pause for a moment just to recognize how perfect it is that Mrs. Pompeo is a Susan. Moving on. No, go ahead, Andrew. You want to say something?
No, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the fact that Mike Pompeo has a politically appointed personal assistant. That like someone had to make that decision. Like, yep, this dude is your personal assistant, Mike Pompeo. I just find that absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so under U.S. law, the president is required to give 30 days notice before firing an inspector general to allow Congress to investigate the reasons for dismissal. In recent months, Congress has not used that month-long notice period to prevent the termination of other watchdog officials fired by the president. Lennox is the latest in a string of officials in watchdog roles fired by the president in recent months, turning on its head the tradition that such jobs are filled with nonpartisan figures. Trump has demanded personal loyalty from officials working in the administration, especially those in an oversight role. Lennox is not the first inspector general to be fired late on a Friday night. On April 3rd this year, Trump dismissed intelligence community inspector general Michael Atkinson, who had first deemed credible a whistleblower complaint expressing concern about Trump's call last summer to his Ukrainian counterpart, Vladimir Zelensky, which ultimately triggered impeachment proceedings against the president. Can we talk about this for a minute? Because
Yeah, I wanted to.
This is absolute, like, hot and steaming bullshit on a freaking cold pasture morn.
Yeah, I wanted to pause here because I don't inherently disagree with the fact that that other guy was fired. The dude that was spreading the bullshit about the
Not a
Eric
whistleblower,
Caramello,
Yeah.
quote Jason Burmis, was a whistleblower who should have all these protections, and it allowed people to see the connection between the state censorship apparatus and the global media platforms. Because if you said the person's name, Jason or Eric Caramello Bar, your video gets removed. And I still can't say the guy's name, so I'm stealing Jason Burmis's little tagline for him. So I think that's always super important to say when impeachment comes up, is that it was bullshit. And it was used as a way to exercise an enforcement of technology at the behest of the government to remove particular content from the internet in a very aggressive fashion.
Well, that, and then also, I don't know what you guys think about this, but with all the things to investigate Pompeo for, like, this is what we're settling on. This is what the oversight committee is interested in.
This is just Steve's,
or not committee, but
Steve however you pronounce his last name.
Lennox.
He was basically an investigator all the way through his career. But during his tenure at the Department of Justice, he supervised and participated in white-collar criminal fraud cases involving corruption and contract fraud against the U.S. in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And as we know through the Washington Post release of the Afghan papers in late 2019, which did 100% codify and just validate everything that WikiLeaks had put out nearly a decade earlier, Afghanistan and Iraq is based on grift. Like, that's what keeps us there. That's why we went in the first place. It's one of the biggest transnational fraud scams in history. And
to give him credit, David McBride is facing 50 years in prison right now for exposing that grift in Australia. He released documents, and a lot of people remember, some people never heard, but the ABC News, the Australian Broadcasting Centre, was rated to have these documents seized and removed by Australian federal police because Australia doesn't have a First Amendment protection. So the federal police are allowed to just completely charge in, alter news records, and take documents directly from journalists. And it was David McBride's release of information that showed the politicization of the Iraq war, or of the Afghanistan war, that caused those raids to happen.
Oh, if we could circle back real quick, though, to the not a whistleblower and the Ukraine thing, we just found out today that there's tape of Joe Biden bribing the freaking Ukrainian prosecutor to drop the Burisma case in his son, holding $1 billion over his head, and it's on tape. And Joey fucking B goes, now, he doesn't come out and say, I'm bribing you, but he's like, you understand what this is for, eh? And it's on fucking tape. And like, just imagine for a second that Donald Trump was caught on a hot mic going, now I'm not bribing you, but here's a bag of cash, and I'm pretty sure you know what to do with it, right? Like, can you imagine the field day that every single one of those bedwetting NPR liberals would have over this? Like, and there's crickets in mainstream media about this tape. Crickets. This further proves that the not a whistleblower isn't a whistleblower, but in fact was a guy following orders from the CIA. The last time that we had John Kiriakou on this show, in fact, John was the one who was like, look, there's only two reasons that you become the CIA liaison to the White House. And it's because you are a wide-eyed go-getter very early on in his career, or you're Erica Caramello Bar, who is someone who's on his way to another position and earned the right to a 2-year soft detail at the White House.
Well, not to mention that I think too, I mean, when you go into the Ukraine thing, I mean, obviously, even the fact that they went to impeach Trump over Ukraine showed, even then, not that most people didn't know, that Russiagate was complete nonsense. And now we have that proven even more, and yet people still don't know about it. And I think that's part of what happens here with Trump and that whole, fake news and everything like that, to really get through a different policy that has nothing to do with the elected president.
Let me tell you what happened. So in 2016, the Chicago Cubs broke their curse and they won the World Series, first time in like 108 years or something like that. And after that, Russiagate broke and people were like, well, fuck it. The Cubs won. Beating a dead horse is now America's favorite pastime. So we've got Russiagate and we can do that forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Long may it wait. And if somebody has a better explanation, I want to goddamn hear it.
Well, the funniest part, and this is before I get back in because I want to read Trump's letter to Pelosi, but the funniest part about the Russiagate thing is that the anti-communist boomers don't believe Russiagate. That's the part that cracks me up. Like the pro-Trump boomer generation that was raised during the height of the Red Scare don't believe the pro-Russian propaganda.
Yeah, and all the free love fucking hippies are like, I'm bringing in new McCarthyism, baby. We live in a cartoon.
It's the biggest paradox. Like, I think, I want to say his name's Robert Reich, released a video talking about the history of how McCarthy used the Red Scare as a way to gain power to justify the Red Scare that they were putting on with the Russiagate. So it was just like the whole complex of like the anti-Russia, anti-communists not supporting the anti-Russia campaign was just, that blew my mind. But so this representative, President Trump, wrote a letter to Nancy Pelosi about Linnick getting fired. And I just want to read it in its full context. It says, Dear Speaker Pelosi, this is to arrive as I am exercising my power as president to remove from office the Inspector General of the Department of State, effective 30 days from today. It is extremely important that we promote the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of federal programs and activities. The Inspectors General have a critical role in the achievement of these goals, as is the case with regards to other positions where I, the president, have the power to appoint by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. It is vital that I have the fullest confidence in the appointees serving as Inspector General. It is no longer the case with regard to this Inspector General. At a later date, I will submit to the Senate my nomination of an individual for this position who has my fullest confidence to meet the appropriate qualifications. So, not really much to be said there. It's not like a groundbreaking thing, but I just wanted to make sure that got put in there because those were the official words of Trump to Pelosi in regards to that.
I suppose if you're the president of the United States and you're never going to be anything more than the public relations face for the oligarchy, because that's all a president is, then you would want to remind, I guess, your subordinates that you're the president all the time, because Trump always finds a way to work that in. Like, oh, and by the way, I'm the president, so I get to do this. Like, not only do I get 2 scoops of ice cream every day, but I get to fire inspectors generals, and sometimes they let me sit in the truck and let me honk the horn. Like, it's a shit job. That's my point. That's what I'm trying to get at. We want to go to the Consortium News article now.
Absolutely.
You want to take this one, Kendra?
Yeah, sure. Do you want, I'll just start at the beginning. Scandinavian activist group has opened signatures for an appeal to the Swedish government for a full and transparent investigation into a possible disappearance of documents and the illegal destruction of evidence in the Swedish prosecutors and police probe of sexual allegations against Julian Assange. The appeal also demands Assange's release from Belmarsh prison in London, where he is on remand in an extradition request by the United States on espionage charges for unauthorized possession and dissemination of classified material. It calls on Sweden to provide him asylum. The investigation the appeal seeks would also look into why Assange's case appears to have exceeded a statute of limitations, as well as into pressure British authorities brought to bear on a Swedish prosecutor against Assange. Sweden has 3 times dropped the case against the imprisoned WikiLeaks publisher. The appeal acts on the findings of Nils Melzer, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, who said Swedish police forged evidence in the case against Assange. Do you want me to go into the history or read down to the case? What do you guys think?
If we could, I would say skip down to the actual text itself at the bottom.
Okay.
But
I was just going to say, for anybody who hasn't seen this article yet, it's a really great one. It's another one of those good articles to share with people too, because they give a great breakdown of the Swedish case, which I know most people are familiar with, but especially someone who might not know, it's a good quick breakdown of that. So the text of the appeal: set Julian Assange free. Appeal to the Swedish government. The whistleblower website WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is detained in the British high security prison Belmarsh. His health is in a critical condition. We, the signatories of this appeal, fear for his life and mental health due to the treatment he is exposed to. We demand his immediate release, respect for his fundamental human rights, a fair and transparent judicial treatment, and protection against extradition to USA. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, Nils Melzer visited Julian Assange in prison on the 9th of May 2019 with a group of medical doctors. They concluded that Assange showed all symptoms that are typical consequences of prolonged mental torture. We are deeply alarmed by the UN findings concerning Assange's state of health and of the legal proceedings he has been subjected to, in particular by the Swedish police from 2010 and onwards. That's just 2010 for a decade. Assange was arrested for breach of bail in the UK, an act which is not a crime, as he feared extradition to Sweden for accusations of rape raised by the Swedish police. Meltzer holds that Assange's subsequent fear of extradition to Sweden and then further to the US was well-founded. The UN report argues that this and a number of other serious breaches of law may have been carried out by the authorities during the process against Assange. Sweden has, since it started this ball to roll, under the Protection from Torture Treaty, CAT, a responsibility also for the pain inflicted upon Assange in Belmarsh and Britain. The Swedish prosecutor and police have refused to respond to claims presented in a letter of the 12th of September 2019. Not to respond to the UN report and the serious accusations it presents is unacceptable. It undermines the authority of the United Nations, and the public is entitled to this information if respect for judicial institutions is to be upheld. We, the signatories of this appeal, find the report of the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture and of the UN's Office on Arbitrary Detention deeply alarming. We demand the immediate release of Julian Assange from British prison and that he be granted asylum in Sweden or another country of his choice, guaranteed not to be extradited to the US. The present coronavirus threat aggravates the situation even further and makes his release even more pressing. Did you guys want to jump in at all before I keep going?
I just wanna give this a shout out before you get to the end of it, because I threw it in the live chats for everybody too. There is a link at the bottom of this article that lets you actually go and sign on to this appeal yourself. The original signers of it were John Shipton, Noam Chomsky, I believe Julian's mom is on there, Eva Jody, and just a bunch of other wonderful, well-known and high-profile activists and things like that. Many politicians, like there's a German politician that's on there. So if you could, please go. I believe that's Set Julian Free is the website for that. Let me just double check though.
It's a .org. I threw it in my chat too.
Yep. Setjulianfree.org. So please go and sign that, because that is super important to get as many signatures on there as we possibly can.
No, I agree with that. You want to wrap up the letter and then we'll discuss and whatnot?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sure. So the end of this, we further demand that the Swedish Ministry of Justice respond to the allegations brought forth by the said UN authorities and instruct appropriate Swedish legal action be taken for a full and transparent investigation into a possible disappearance of documents alleged by the UN report in order to clarify if or to what extent illegal destruction of evidence and perversion of the course of justice has taken place. A full and transparent investigation into why the case against Assange has been stretched out over years when Swedish law sets a strict limit of months for such proceedings. A full and transparent investigation into the nature of cooperation between Swedish and British police with the alleged aim of conducting extra-legal arrest, harassment, and detention of Julian Assange, and with the possible aim of extraditing him to a third country. That Sweden respect the United Nations by fulfilling its obligations to inter alia the following international treaties of which it is a signatory state: the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, CAT, ratified 1986. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, CCPR, ratified in 1971. International Law Commission, the International Wrongful Act of a State, ILC, and IWAS. We finally demand that Julian Assange be given a fair treatment in accordance with principles of basic human rights and the rule of law, and that any wrongdoings against him brought about by representatives of the Swedish authorities be rectified and fully compensated for in accordance with Swedish law. So that's the end of that. And in the bottom here, to Andrew's point, you know, some of the other people who signed on were John Pilger, John Shipton, Julian's father, Noam Chomsky, NSA whistleblower Tom Drake, German journalist Günter Wallraff, and former UN Assistant Secretary General Dennis Halliday. And then everybody watching the Vigil tonight as well.
Every last one of you.
And please share this article around, and please share that link around, most specifically for setjulianfree.org, because that is super important to get people signing on to that.
And while you're in a link sharing mood, we're going to go ahead and put the GoFundMe up one more time. Because, you know, 3 weeks in DC is a long time to be away. And yeah, it's one of those things where we went into February knowing it was going to be a learning experience, and we learned a ton, and we can't wait to be able to roll it out onto the streets of Washington, D.C., but we definitely need your help to be able to do that. So if you can, please do donate. If you can't, we totally get it. Please share the heck out of the link.
And please join us, because
Yeah.
it is going to be a blast. We're in we've had probably about 3 or 4 like behind the scenes organizer meetings. And I'm just really excited to put out the official dates and times and all that for when things are going on, because it's going to be, if we can pull it off right, it's going to be super impressive. So I hope that it's a way that we can build attention and momentum around this issue. But this was actually an article that this next one that Kendra had recommended out of the Medium. So let me get this pulled up here. Let me know when it's up on screen, Josh. But this is the Assange's hell in the U.S. heist. So this article really breaks down what we've learned recently about the theft of documents from Julian out of the Ecuadorian embassy, the money that got transferred, and all that. Do you want to pick this one up, Steve, or do you want to, Kendra?
I got it. Give me just a second. I'm posting a link to our Discord in my chat. And by the way, guys,
it is in the action document as well.
Okay.
Like this week's list of call to actions.
So this is by Jude Fleming. It dropped 2 days ago. And it says the unimaginable happened to Julian Assange on April 11th, 2019, the day of betrayal, when he was abducted by British police and then transferred to a high security prison on behalf of the United States. The bail breach infraction was a ruse for the immediate goal of putting him in proxy custody for the U.S., but it got worse. Ecuadorian officials received a U.S. request for access to Assange's personal property left in the Ecuadorian embassy post-kidnap. Then a judge authorized a judicial request to go through everything. It was an invitation to pillage his privacy and legal defense. Last May 20th to 23rd, 2019, Assange's personal, professional, legal, and medical effects, including cash, 27 phones, cameras, handwritten notebooks, SIM and memory cards, routers, legal documents, digital storage devices, laptops, and paper files and binders. The objects were removed by prosecutors Wilson Toanga, I'm gonna screw that all up, and Fabian Chavez in cooperation with a criminal assistance request by the U.S. within the extradition process. It was a massive heist for which Ecuador was handsomely rewarded. Items were first transferred to Quito and placed under the custody of the judicial police. Ecuador allowed the U.S. to help themselves do Assange's belongings, yet he can't access them. I am not sure where his belongings are now. They could be in Ecuador, where the U.S. examines them, or possibly in the U.S. Much of it has likely been uploaded to a secure cloud for remote access and team forensics. By one estimate, the computing and cellular equipment has 110 terabytes with thousands of encrypted files. According to the Evening Standard, quote, the search is being carried out under the authorization of a judge and following a request for judicial assistance from the United States, adding that other countries had also made similar requests. If officials do decide to confiscate any of the whistleblowers' belongings, these will be sent to Ecuador for analysis and then possibly passed on to those seeking judicial assistance. It has been a year since Ecuador seized Assange's assets and subsequently gave access to the United States, his arch adversary. The search and seizure of legal defense manuscripts, cell phones, laptops, and memory storage devices is the horror of every journalist, activist, researcher, or publisher. Assange was robbed. Even though it is his stuff, neither he nor his lawyers, family, or colleagues can access it. By extension, the Assange defense team has been robbed. That is what he meant when he spoke during an October 21st, 2019 case management hearing. Quote, this is not equitable. I can't research anything. I can't access any of my writing. It's very difficult where I am in Belmarsh. I'm up against a superpower with unlimited resources. I can't think properly.
And real quick here, we read in DC the first time, the introduction for the book Cypherpunks, which is a transcript of one of the TV shows that Julian had, a series that he did. But in that first opening, and we actually have a vigil where we went through the first chapter of that book and the prologue of it, he specifically points out how what it comes down to is that encryption and the ability to secure information behind a digital border, so to speak, is innate within the universe. And it'll come down to a time when it essentially is drawn out between the powers of the state being exercised to perform torture against Julian and the ability for them to solve the keys to these encryption codes. And the words that he uses is no amount of torture can solve a math problem, or no amount of force can solve a math problem. And I think that that's what this heist, I hope, ultimately shows, is that the U.S., even though they have this immense physical global power to reach and grab this man and drag his life down for 10 years, still can't cross that barrier of that encryption wall without him being the one to allow them to do it.
You want to go ahead and move on to the contract tracing? I always say contract because I feel like these people are paid Pinkertons. But
I think that's. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, a little lower down in this article, if we could scroll down a bit in it, Josh, it actually gets into the possessions, like the list of possessions that they took from Julian. So I just wanted to make sure, because that's about the most important thing to get out to people for all this.
Well, and I think it's also important, just real quick, to remember that, you know, I mean, they did all of this for somebody who supposedly just violated a bail charge, you know. I mean, and that's a big deal to remember. And now he's, you know, he is just on remand. Even in the eyes of the law, he is not, you know, he has not been convicted of anything ever. So it's again that, you know, punishment by process, and then even making sure that the process is not in any way going to be fair to him whatsoever. That's it. I just wanted to get that in there for this specific article.
So our own Taylor Hudak is in my chat right now on Slow News Day. She has a question specifically for you, Andrew. Can Andrew explain the definition of solidarity and what it means to him?
So solidarity is, and everyone's laughing, this points back to a super old Vigil, but solidarity is standing alongside someone. In so many words, it is recognizing that they have a struggle as well, and that it may or may not in some way be interrelated to yours, but still matters in the grand scale of everyone existing. I like to add to that, and I don't know if there's a proper word to express it, but that feeling of solidarity put into action. And I don't necessarily know what that term is. So if anyone has any suggestions for it or ideas, it's one of those verbal failings that I have.
I got a phrase for it, and Reverend Annie Chambers gave it to me, and Malcolm X gave it to her. And that phrase is, we only get what we organize and take.
I think that defines it pretty well.
I think every little hipster out there in YouTube land should get a nice little delicate script tattoo of that on them, and then like go flex in the mirror and be like, oh yeah, we only get what we organize and take. Guess I'll organize and go take it. At least what we're after is a show of nonviolent force or solidarity, if you will, in Washington, D.C. to move a conversation into a post-partisan realm. And that conversation is, like I was saying earlier in the Vigil, no matter what your cause is, it doesn't get a chance to proliferate if we don't have free and open information. If we can't, okay, first of all, if we can't have unfettered access to what the truth is through primary source documentation, first person primary source interviews, then all we have is what we're being told to think or how to feel about something by people whose job it is to obfuscate. So I can't stress this enough. If you're someone who is currently involved in an activist cause, on the front of your sign should be your cause. On the back side of your sign should be free Julian Assange. And you can feel free to spin that around as often as you like, because you don't get one without the other.
I think that's so true. And to your point in solidarity, it reminds me too of like even the minds coming together when we were all in DC. You know, you had some different political ideas and different things like that. At least I know for me. But you know, you see people coming together, like to Steve's point, in something more important. And so I think that that's part of what we have to remember, especially in this solidarity movement, is, you know, you might hear things depending on what side you're on that are a little bit, you know, that might be like cat claws on a chalkboard or something, but you just, you know, you got to let that go while we concentrate on us being able to, you know, fight about it with truthful information later on, you know, because right now it's like we have an alien invasion going on that we have to stop.
I mean, I'd like to point out that on today's vigil, just to what you were talking about, we had someone who is in support of a government-ran healthcare system on the same panel standing in solidarity with someone that is running an organization that is about making sure private healthcare still exists. So, in so many words to define the organization. So, ideas like this, like Julian Assange and press freedom and basic privacy rights and the right to trial and things like that, are so much more fundamental that it just builds this great foundation for everything else to then be placed upon.
True. And then also, you know, the First Amendment, you know, you don't have any other civil liberties without that. You have to have that, because otherwise you don't know what's happening with all the other ones.
And you have to have the second to ensure that you get to keep the first. And
That's
you
true.
have to have the fourth so that you're not freaking what's left of our civil. Look, I can't stress enough just how god awful it is that Wyden Amendment failed by one vote, to make sure that your web browsing history isn't accessed whenever the hell the federal government feels like accessing it, to be used against you. It's not that the federal government wants to send targeted advertising to you so you buy their shoes. They want to use this information against you legally, against you politically, to cripple your activism, to cripple your organization. I don't really got a whole lot to hide, so, like, but I still don't want my browser history read.
And that's a very fucking intimate thing. Like,
right? Like
who the fuck
my
else gets to read your browser
videos,
history?
not yours. I said that out loud, didn't I?
I think I was talking over it. They may not have heard. So, to a point with that, too, like, as ridiculous as having to argue against allowing the federal government unlimited access to your browser history actually is, but for the way that it can be used beyond just simply targeting people, is collecting people's data about what they're observing in a more direct fashion to be able to tailor the propaganda better. And I don't know if I'm really explaining that well or simplifying it well, but essentially being able to see what content people are viewing and then tailoring the content to make them think a certain way.
John Bolton has a super PAC. And if you didn't know that John Bolton has a super PAC, John Bolton has a super PAC. And a few years ago, they put out a document that basically was an instruction manual to do exactly what you're saying. How to best target people, to psychologically manipulate them, to get them to vote your way. There's a whole workup. There's a white paper on it. It's one of those things where, like, I'll have to go find that link, but I will find that link and we can show it on Saturday.
Yeah, there's a whole industry built around the regulation of voter thought, essentially. And it starts at its core with the algorithms that exist within the social media companies and the way they actually allow people's information to be proliferated.
Which that was always a big thing that, you know, Julian Assange was talking about, and especially right before they, you know, cut his internet at the embassy, that they'd have these advanced algorithms where you would have been gone at step one, even though it took you 5 steps to get where they wanted you to go, but that you're going to end up there no matter what, you know, and that's a scary thought.
I had an absolute legend in independent hip hop on my show this morning, and I asked him like just a general question about, I think it was related to Julian Assange, but he was like, "Look, man, you got to understand, this isn't the mid 90s anymore. People get big because they sell out before they make it big, because an algorithm determines their success. The artist's ability doesn't determine their success. The fans don't determine their success. They don't know they're fans until the algorithm tells them they need to like it, because it already conforms with everything that they have co-signed, with their consent, fully manufactured. And that's just a wild way to look at it. And it's true not just with art, but with information and with politics. Like, I've been able to interview a number of different candidates for president that nobody's ever going to get a chance to vote for, because even the Green Party and the Libertarian Party seem to be doing a pre-selection process. But those guys all have the right to be heard. Their ideas all have the right to be discussed. But because algorithmically they get shut out of the conversation before a real conversation takes place, they're, confined to the dark corners of the interwebs.
Well, and you have, this convincing of the public going on that it's not in your interest to hear these other stupid candidates. That's always been a complaint I've had, even with the presidential debates, that we don't have a third party in there. That's, even if you say that that's nothing for the people. Okay, well then let them make that, let us make that decision. And I understand there has to be some process where you can't have, like, I can't just be on the presidential debate because I decide to, but still, you see what I'm saying.
And so Julian had talked about the use of artificial intelligence propaganda. I think that was one of the last conversations he got to have before he got cut from actually being able to speak and communicate. And so I just want to point out to people, because Fee did a really good job of breaking down the way money and our current media structure influences the way people consume content. And I just like to leave people with the idea of being aware that there are some people and channels and media institutions that exist specifically to herd people into specific narratives. And it applies broadly. And sometimes it's individuals and sometimes it is institutions. But just keep an eye out for those. Because it's one of those things that you can't really tear it down, but at the same time, you have to be intimately aware of when something like that is occurring.
And sometimes it's individual institutions, and sometimes it's individuals who should be institutionalized that work for the institutions, who are individually doing what Andrew just said. You're welcome. You're welcome.
But so, do we want to talk about Privacy International?
Yeah, let's do that, because it really is one of those things where I feel like the concept of contact tracing, the snitch patrols, they're never going away. There's going to be multiple reasons to deploy a snitch army throughout, especially as we become more and more impossibly authoritarian. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at that one. I had it up. Where'd it go?
So it starts by going over it's what they call key findings. And Privacy International has done great work. They speak out against a whole lot of things. But this in particular, I want to point out because it's something that's very disconcerting to me as someone that understands why privacy exists, which is to limit people's ability to bring down institutions against other individuals, essentially not allowing people to use process as punishment. And this contact tracing throughout this entire article is framed as, well, we can do it the right way. And I think that the entire framing of this article is completely, I don't know, just overshadowed by the fact that they're not arguing against contact tracing. They're just arguing against how to make it okay.
Well, and I think that goes to the point of the, the echo chamber, which you're, allowed a certain lively debate within that. But what's not on the table is whether contact tracing is okay in the first place.
I can't get this stupid article to load, so I'm useless right now. I'm floundering. Closing out every other.
Do you want to lead on this one, Kendra?
Okay. Well, if anybody has it up already, go ahead and run with it.
Is there any specific part in here, Andrew, that you kind of wanted to go over on this
We can really
article?
just highlight the key findings of the Privacy International article.
Okay. So their key findings, guys, are contact tracing is an important emergency healthcare initiative and is necessarily invasive. Coronavirus apps do much more and much less than manual contact tracing. There are dangerous tracing initiatives that regularly report on your activities. There are interesting initiatives that may or may not work. These are somewhat privacy aware and can be either centralized or decentralized. Apple and Google support decentralized proximity tracing in privacy and security aware ways. Those who build these systems need to quickly build and engender trust. They've been flailing in secrecy.
Now that's interesting wording, especially when it comes to Apple and Google. Apple and Google support decentralized proximity tracing in privacy and security aware ways. That is the exact same thing as a politician supporting Medicare for all. Look at Pramila Jayapal, for example, who wrote a Medicare for all bill, introduced it into Congress last year, ostensibly supports Medicare for all. Just the other day, hopped on the tweeters and said, Americans need access to affordable health care. Which is the exact same thing as saying, fuck you, peasant, you're not getting your Medicare for all. You're not getting universal health care. You're not. We're going to work on getting you access to affordable health care. I have access to a Bugatti. I cannot afford a Bugatti, but I have access to it. In the same way that Google and Apple support the privacy and security aware initiative in a decentralized fashion. But will they implement it? Hell no. They're already not.
Well, and one thing too, I was going to ask you guys, maybe you could confirm this, but I know that I had heard that I thought that they were just kind of automatically loading this into the updates anyhow. Is that correct? Or is that just they're talking about doing that?
No, that's in your May update. The contact tracing app is in your May update.
And I think it's important. We should try to get Sean back on as soon as possible, just to give people some type of presentation about installing like F-Droid or something on an iPhone or things like that, just so that way it can, I don't know, get around it. I don't know if we're allowed to show people how to do something like that, but I feel like we should. And I think Sean could probably put something together pretty quick to help us out.
I feel like if it'll get A4A in trouble, then we can do it through Slow News Day and I'll get in trouble. I really, I'll go ahead and step up for that one. I will.
But I want to point out in this Privacy International article, there's not one mention of Palantir, right? They mentioned the UK multiple times. They talk about their system and how they're rolling out contact tracing apps and things like that. But not once do they mention the actual private intelligence company that is running the data sets for this, and the people and other organizations and institutions that have contracts with that company that would then be able to access those data sets. And I think that that's highly irresponsible to not mention anything about Palantir, to not mention anything about the Five Eyes. And for a international privacy institution to not put Five Eyes and Palantir on the front of this coronavirus contact tracing is beyond irresponsible, to put it lightly.
Who have you heard reference the Five Eyes outside of like people who are like personal friends with Susie Dawson? I mean, that's an honest question. Like, is there a discussion about the Five Eyes global intelligence sharing network going on in another corner of the internet that I'm unaware of? Because like the first time that I heard it, Julian had brought it up. It was like a 2012 speech, maybe. He was already in the embassy. It was, and he was giving like a speech at a conference or something like that, and he mentioned it, and I was like, "What the fuck is it? I don't, huh?" And it's one of those things where, like, if you know, great, but like, it's not a secret handshake. More people should know what this institution is and who they are and what they do. And Palantir is involved in the 3 different pieces of healthcare legislation in Australia right now too. Like,
and that will give them control of 3 of the 5 Five Eyes nations. And there's no alarms being sounded at any level of the media about that level of consolidation of information that I'm aware of.
No, and every single one of those simulated exercises from Dark Winter all the way on to Event 201, Crimson Contagion, all of them, what's baked into it? Continuity of government and a complete shutdown of the people's internet. Who prospers during that transitional continuity of government period? It's organizations like Palantir, who not only have the contracts, but they have all of our data. They have all of our information, and they've got direct clients. They've got direct clients who sole purpose of their job is to target activists, organizers, and people who are trying to take an individual or collective stand for some level of corporate responsibility.
And because we got to be, we're going to start wrapping up here in a little bit. We got a couple minutes, but just to kind of piggyback off of something that Steve had been talking about, the entire coronavirus institution now essentially that's forming, that's allowing all of this crazy stuff to happen. A lot of times you hear the argument from people when you try to talk to them about like the global power consolidation that's happening right now with all of these institutions. And they say, well, they're not just going to go bankrupt. Like, they're not just going to close down all this and shut it down for nothing. And a lot of times they will, because it's an investment into a larger plan. The big players were still allowed to continue and keep operating throughout all of this. The small businesses were destroyed, but those larger institutions took a loss because there's a lot to gain down the road, and there's a lot of money to be made through the use of intelligence community databasing, contact tracing, and advertising, not including the political torture that can come from it by selling this information off. But I would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight for our 46th vigil. We will be back again on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. My name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. And you can find all of us and this on Twitter at action_4 Assange and Action for Assange on YouTube as well.
And hi, everybody into the chat, and thank you to Josh and Kimber as well. And my name is Kendra Christian, and you can find me on Twitter at edubs13, and you can follow Denver Free Assange at DNVFreeJA.
If you're seeing me for the first time, my name's Steve Poikinen. I do host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on YouTube by typing Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. I am also on the Rockfin, DLive, and a couple other platforms occasionally, depending on how much they are Kevining me at the moment. Do check out the interview I did with R.A. the Rugged Man this morning. It's a really good conversation. Ray McGovern will be on my show this Sunday. I'm really looking forward to that. I don't have a lot booked this week. I'm going to be on a panel with Nico House on Thursday. Our wonderful tech guy here, Sleepy Josh, is also my tech guy, and I'm trying not to kill him because I tried to the last few weeks. So I'm taking a break from murdering my tech guy slowly, and just trying to get out some quality shows in between. Big thanks to our guests tonight, Fiorella Isabel, John Kiriakou, and Norman Singleton. Again, thanks Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos, Mean Panda for the graphics. You guys in the chat, we love you. We do. We do this because you guys give us all of the energy in the world for us. Thank you very, very much. Do pass around the GoFundMe link. Do look at the action link for the week. If you can donate to the GoFundMe, please do that. If you can't, again, no big deal. Just proliferate the link